So my name's James. I am COO at a company called Phase 3. And just in terms of my background, I'm one of those strange people who went straight from college doing business studies into a degree in HR. Always knew that I wanted to work in HR ultimately when I started at college. And I worked alongside being at university in the police, local authorities, and then I moved to outsourced providers. I also sort of found a love and a joy for payroll at the same time. So my last role when I worked in industry as such was head of HR and payroll at quite a large local authority. And then I realised that I had an affinity for technology and systems. And so I moved then into Phase 3, into an organisation supporting other organisations with HR and payroll technology challenges. And then we bolted finance onto that as well. So I joined Phase 3 when I was employee number 5, 10 years ago. We're now at 105. And I have sort of grown up with the business ultimately, and I now lead the organisation as COO. But I've never fallen out of HR, payroll, and finance. I've always sort of kept my toe in. So I still work with clients even now, and worked with quite a number of universities in particular over the last couple of years with some challenges around processes and HR and payroll solutions. So I do come with a slight tech slant on some of the challenges that we'll be talking about today. Just a bit more about Phase 3. Just some of you may have heard of us. We may have worked together in the past, but we're a business split into two halves essentially. So we provide professional services and managed services. And our professional services arm looks after helping organisations to select, develop, manage, and get the most out of the HR, payroll, and finance technologies. And in our managed service arm, we support organisations on an ongoing basis with payroll, system administration, reporting, and analytics. So we're a sort of a wraparound service to the kind of providers that you might buy your HR payroll software from. We sit alongside them and help what we call the golden triangle, which is supporting you as the customer, the vendor in terms of them providing the software, and us providing those wraparound services. Now we do cover all sectors, but we've got lots of speciality within education, all the way from schools and academies, multi-academy trusts, up to further and higher education as well. That's enough of the sales pitch on Phase 3. So in terms of the sector and some of the challenges we wanted to discuss, the Guild approached us because of some of the content that we'd written that was published in HR Grapevine. So we do quite a lot of content around HR and payroll challenges. And the main challenges that we're going to focus on and talk about today are people challenges, systems and technology, the operating model of HR and how that works in establishments, processes, and budgets and funding, because we know that these are always a challenge. Now, on the next slide, I'm going to ask you to grab your phone and open the camera app, because there's a live poll I want to run just to see if any of these resonate with you guys. But just before I do that, just a bit more in terms of what we'll cover on each of those. So in terms of the people challenges, we'll be talking there around recruitment and retention, people development, and well-being in particular. From the systems and technology angle, we're looking at the digital employee experience, the digital maturity of you as an organisation, and data challenges. From an operating model, we'll be looking at whether or not you operate in centralised HR or more of a devolved HR function with managed services or with shared services internally, and how much elements of self-service you utilise as well. From processes, we'll talk through process best practice, governance and compliance. And with budgets and funding, we'll be talking through people management budgets, HR and payroll budgets, and the resources that you have available, and how you can get the most out of people as well. So workforce management, essentially. So we will deep dive into each of those, but if I can just ask, if you just scan this code, it doesn't collect any data about you. It's just literally puts up on the screen for you the 5 key challenges, and it allows you to vote. So if you just tap on them one by one, it'll let you know which is the highest rated problem. And we can see on the screen in a second. I'll share my screen and move it over, but we can see that the votes happen in real time. So it lets us know exactly what you're thinking and what the challenges are. So things have started to move around. I'll just slide that across. So we're currently seeing budgets and funding as the highest rated challenge that you're experiencing. Systems and technology, then people, processes, and operating model. And I suppose that would sort of make sense in quite a well-established sector such as this. As more people are voting, it will update. You can click on them and drag them, or you can just select them in the right order. And we will sort of briefly discuss the results of this before I move on. I think I'll just give you a few more seconds just to update that. I can see a few people now just signed in and voting. So budget and funding challenge is going to be one that we'll spend more time on. And this just helps me just in terms of let me know which areas of the presentation we should focus a little bit more on the content on. Okay, I'm just going to slide that back over to right. You can continue to vote. And as I said, I'll share those results at the end as well, just in case the polls have changed. But first order was budgets and funding. And the second was technology. So within the HR four walls, obviously we will discuss each of these challenges in turn. So if we focus on people, first of all, this is where we'll be discussing recruitment and retention, employee development and well-being. And some of the statistics that we used when we created the content for the HR Grapevine article, 44,000 educators left the profession in 2022. And in 2023, the student to tutor ratio rose from 1 to 17 to 1 to 18. So we can see that there are challenges on people. The average pupil-facing worker in the UK works 49.3 hours per week on average. And obviously that leads to challenges in terms of well-being and burnout in particular. And we know that there is obviously a seasonality to some of this, but that's based on the averages overall. So in terms of recruitment and retention, the development of employees and well-being, one of the key questions I would ask is how do you engage and how are your processes in terms of people? We know, for example, that in recruitment, we have safer recruitment guidelines that say that we have to collect quite a lot of data about an employee before they're able to join an organization. We have to put them through the relevant pre-employment checks, and there can be quite a data heavy focus on that initial interaction with the organization. Now, if you believe the CIPD, they say that when people visit your website to apply for a job, 70% of that decision is already made in terms of they want to join the organization. They're not there just for a look. They've been aware of a vacancy and they want to apply for that role. They've done their research. And really, the key question I was asked is, how easy is it to be a candidate or an applicant on your recruitment site? Obviously, recruitment and retention is a challenge. There is lots of organizations that these talented people can join, and we want to give them the very best experience of that front door. So from an application perspective, how long does it take? And do you have a process which is slick and easy, or is it quite complex? We'll cover recruitment in a little bit more detail a little bit later on. But from a retention perspective, I also just wanted to touch on the two things that are most important to people right now, which is pay and flexibility. And I just caught the tail end of the last conversation, obviously talking about flexible working requests. It is a hot topic right now. Obviously, the legislation has been updated recently, but also the fact that, people do want to have that degree of flexibility. And it's really interesting seeing how different establishments operate, the different operating models in terms of how they recruit staff. So some have a very traditional structure around full-time tutors, and some are very much engagement driven by the different courses that are offered and have more of an associate lecturer kind of organisation. And it is interesting for us to stand back and see how different establishments operate that in different models and what seems to work well for the individual employee. But I think it's an industry that is fair to say people generally do work for more than one organisation and are quite vocal about the organisation they work for. They're either very proud of it or they can be quite public about the challenges. So the key challenge that we have to address is how can we maximise the the salaries of those individuals, the benefits, because for employees now, pension is not enough. It used to be considered the gold standard, but we're aware that flexibility is almost now more important than pensions to most employees. And there are tools available, and they aren't necessarily very expensive. And it's interesting to see solutions such as Perkbox, for example. We've seen many organizations that have developed a business case to implement a tool like Perkbox or another well-being app. And the business case can be based on the fact that by implementing it, there can be a number of savings achieved through salary sacrifice, for example, and through a direct link to an increase in employee attendance and obviously reduction in absence. So there is a business case to be built for this, and it's always a challenge we face in HR within this particular sector, because we have to justify the spend on employees in terms of what we're actually doing for them. But some organisations will offer things such as Perkbox, and that's the ability for employees to maximise their earnings through perks and the other things that they offer as well as part of that solution, such as wellbeing initiatives. So Perkbox, again, this is just an example solution. There are many more out there, Reward Gateway and many other solutions. But they basically move the wellbeing strategy beyond just occupational health. And again, we understand the importance of occupational health. It has a time and a place, as has just been discussed in the last session. But where there are things that employees can take responsibility for themselves, it really does give them the opportunity to be able to self-serve on some of those wellbeing actions. So, for example, it has things in there around webinars on sleep management, how you can be more resilient, how you handle stress in the workplace, different things that you can do in terms of mindfulness, free yoga sessions to attend in classes, and all sorts of things that the employee can choose and self-serve themselves, and let the profile know exactly what it is that they're interested in for their well-being, and it can help to support them. That's very low touch for the organization, but as a provision, it's something that you can really shout out about and share the fact that you do offer that as an organization. And well-being and initiatives and strategies should be in place. That's obvious. But there are things that we can do as an organization around also looking at how you can become disability confident, for example, menopause confident, leading on from the previous session, and fertility confident. These are all things that you can do as an organisation to really start to show to your employees and to prospective employees that you are an organisation that cares about people and you want to support them and help them grow and develop. So in terms of a few top tips on the people front, putting yourself in the shoes of the candidate is the first thing I would do. How does that journey feel? Look at your well-being and retention strategies together. What small changes can you make that might make a big difference? And even if that is just in the messaging, so if you are committing to being an employer that's disability confident, for example, what does that mean and how can you communicate that with the organisation? And really look at what makes you an employer of choice and how you communicate in that. So the second area of focus is around processes. Now, processes are very closely linked to systems, but we also know in HR there is obviously a process-driven requirement in terms of meeting end goals that we have to achieve. So one thing I would say is, from a process perspective, in as much as we can, the word automation does get used a lot, but there are some simple things that we can automate. And just as an example of this, I went to a meeting at the AO Arena last week in Manchester. And it was a show day, so it was quite a busy arena. And they were interviewing for stewards to attend the arena. And I was early from a meeting, was stood outside waiting at the security gate. The person that arranged the meeting with me had given me really clear instructions on where to get to and what to do on a show day. But for these candidates, I saw over the 20 minutes, nearly every one of them went to the wrong entrance. And the security guard at that entrance then had to refer them on to the next entrance down. And then they asked the security guard there, who then confirmed and checked that they were available for the interview and then allowed them through. So within that 20 minutes, they've disrupted the workday of two people that didn't need to be disrupted in that sense. Now, this isn't within HR, but there's a really obvious thing that we can do there, in that it would probably take 20 minutes of somebody's time to fix the invite to interview process to say, when you're attending on a show day, go to this gate, it's located next to this bridge, and here's the Google Maps link for you. And that would make a significant difference in terms of that candidate's experience, but also we're not taking up the time of other people in the organization. So it's a really simple example of how we can automate a process by giving the employee the information up front, and the system is firing out that invitation to them. But it took a small change that would make a big difference to the organization. And that's something that I think we often forget when we think about processes. HR is a process driven function, naturally. We want to be driven by compliance and governance, and we want to do things safely for the organization. And we can often forget that processes aren't just a means to an end. So one of the things that I often say is, who in the organization is thinking about the experience of the process, so how it feels to the person going through it. The experience, which is frictionless, is the aim that we have, and it often leads to a higher quality of output. So when we're talking about, the new hire process, for example, if you think about the buying process on Amazon, you know how to search for a product. It's really streamlined that you can toggle to say you only want to see which are on Prime. You can start to do one-click buying because they've recognized that that makes it easier for you. That's a frictionless process. And what we want to do is be able to bring that frictionless process to HR processes. So if I give you an example, if I notify you that I want to take parental leave, you're going to need certain information from me, probably a MAP B1 if I'm an expectant mother, for example, and you might want to know when I plan to take time. And then from that, there might be a risk assessment that needs to be conducted, a workforce management assessment around who's going to be covering my teaching requirements, etc. If we build into the process a notification, for example, that I let HR know via self-service or through the system, or whichever process you go through, it might be a ticketing system, I'm letting you know that this is something that I need information on. And from that, I automatically get in my inbox or to my phone a notification that says, thanks for letting us know. This is everything you need to be aware of. This is the policy. This is our pay strategy in terms of maternity. This is what you'll need to notify your manager on. This is the rules around the risk assessment and what we might want to do with you. That's a very simple process to be able to implement, and that's just focusing on one. And as I mentioned, often we consider that process management needs to be considered end to end for every single process. Interventions in processes can be delivered on a small scale and grow from there. So the top tips I would give you are automate what you can, find out what the system can take away and reduce that noise from questions and queries, empower the employees to have the information to hand themselves and not just on an intranet where it's really hard to find, and focus on the experience of the process, not just the outputs that you're expecting to deliver. So systems and technology now. So thinking about the digital employee experience, and we're looking at, is this personalized? Is it quite paper-based and manual, or is it frictionless? And one thing I would say is, if you're an organization that doesn't have technology in place which allows self-service, it allows employees to, again, empower themselves, managers to have self-service and access to information, then I would say, why not? Because there are systems out there that are capable of that, and they're not necessarily too expensive to be able to deliver that. The system doesn't do it shouldn't be an excuse. One of the recommendations we often make to organizations is, in HR, be the different personas. So look at your system as a candidate, as a new starter, as somebody who's been here for a while, as a manager, as a senior manager, and look at how the system interacts with you based on those different personas. Because we often forget, once the system's been implemented, that it does need to be maintained, and that we need to essentially, as we would with a car, have an annual MOT, fuel it, and give it some oil to keep it running smoothly. So who in your organization is the person responsible for doing that? And that is one of the key challenges in terms of technology. It does need to be updated. And we often talk at Phase 3 about the digital maturity journey. So where do you fit in that? Are you quite basic in terms of you have a system of record, but your processes are quite manual? You use an Excel, for example, for quite a lot of things. Are you a little bit more mature in that you have self-service? You've got managers able to do some devolved activity, and are they getting reports on what's happened? Do you have dashboards, and can they drill down into those dashboards? And can you make, as an organization, decisions based on that data? Or are you in the third tier that we call the prescriptive and the AI generation, which is where you've got predictive analytics, you've got dashboards with insight, not just presented information to you, and self-service is the focus. So there's the real push that employees and managers trigger these processes themselves, and the system drives that engagement with the process. It allows them to be able to interact with the system in a seamless way. So the data and the processes are important, but it's the experience of how the processes are managed that's really important as well from the employee perspective. There is nothing more frustrating than not being able to book a holiday or find your payslip when you want to be able to find it and ask questions about it. So in terms of systems in 2024, what should you expect? You should have a slick and efficient onboarding process, which gathers all the information you need about the candidate before they start, self-service, workflows and automation. Most systems these days have some element of a chatbot in them or some kind of AI assisted support, and process guidance and workflows, and a significant value in data and reporting. So the ability to make decisions based on the information that's at your hands. So top tips on technology is to be the persona, check that process from each of the different personas and see how the system interacts and how you'll be able to make some improvements. And then focus on where you are in that digital maturity journey and where you want to get to. As I mentioned, incremental improvements are better than trying to take a big bang approach and it taking too long. Budget and funding next. So people budgets, HR, payroll, resources, and getting the most out of people. In the industry, not a lot of cloth left to cut in terms of budgets. So being as efficient as possible is always the ask that your organizations are asking of you, and maximizing the value of the people that work for the organization and also the assets that you have in terms of software and processes. So from a budgeting perspective, finance need HR's help. That's always the case. We need to be able to give them information around staff turnover, forecasting absence levels, expected spend on overtime and agency requirements, for example. And if that can only be based on what happened in the past, because we don't have the ability to look into the future in terms of knowing that somebody's going to be going off on sick leave or maternity leave in the future, then that is what we have to be able to provide to the finance team. But we are key in that there should be the view of a budgeted establishment and what we know needs to be delivered for the organisation and where the gaps are. The HR and payroll team structure can be different in lots of different establishments. And again, there is no one size that fits all. And we often get asked the question, how big should a HR team be in an organisation of this size? I think that's a very difficult question to answer because it depends on so many factors, such as, do you have engaged managers? Do you have engaged employees that are happy to contribute to processes and you use self-service? Or are you quite a traditional organisation in that they need hand-holding in a lot of these areas, and managers need lots of support in terms of making decisions? So it does depend on if you are a technology-first organisation or if you are a person-centred organisation. But from a workforce management perspective, in terms of budget and funding, again, this is something that the systems and process should help with. And it's surprising how many organizations don't have this process in place. But really, it's about obviously understanding from the departments, the different schools within the organization, what do they need in terms of resources? And do we tailor our recruitment and selection process to be able to support them? And also looking at the onboarding process as well to make sure that that's seamless, so that when you identify a need in the organisation, we can get somebody in quickly to respond to that need in order to be able to unlock the funding from delivering that to the learner. And performance management is absolutely critical in terms of this, because as we know, if there are employees who need to be, we need to manage their contribution to the organisation, we need to be able to have a seamless performance management process in place. And that doesn't necessarily mean just a Word document that's looked at once a year, where we set objectives and then never look at it again. OKRs are the latest trend. They've been around for a long time, but people only seem to be talking about them now. But looking at how you manage performance is also a really important aspect in terms of budgets and funding, because it means that ultimately we're trying to reduce the cost of replacing staff who we don't want in the organisation. So one of the really simple things that we see that can be implemented in organizations, and it's worked in particular with an organization, a pull tool that helps to reduce turnover. And that organization has seen feedback that said that the recognition has improved motivation of employees. And this is a simple public praise tool. So they can say thank you to a colleague, to a manager, or to somebody that they've worked with. And it's linked to the core values of the university. So one of their core values is independence. And people can say, the reason why I'm giving you this recognition is because I think you've shown a great deal of independence on this particular situation. And recognition is such a simple tool, but it's one that's often underutilized in organizations in terms of the ability to improve motivation of employees and ultimately, hopefully, stop them from wanting to leave. And the final area of the challenges that we'll cover is the operating model. And the operating model within HR obviously is something that there's lots of research about. David Ulrich has been for the last 20 years talking about the Ulrich model. And it's interesting to see again in different organizations how this is managed in different ways. Often in HE in particular, we do see that centre of excellence centrally in terms of that HR function that is really sort of proudly supporting the organisation through challenges. But there are still organisations where there is quite a devolved level of responsibility, especially if you have sort of sub arms of the university or trading arms, for example. So the different operating model routes are obviously driven by, again, how much you are invested in terms of partnering the organization versus how much of the transactional support you have to take on. So in organizations where there is an outsourced service, for example, we tend to see smaller HR teams, but they're more focused around strategy of the organization and also supporting them through sort of more high level cases in terms of the individual casework that needs to be managed. But also in organizations where there is a shared service, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not adding value. And really the choice is, are you confident as an organization that you can provide that high level of service in the transactional arena? And if that means that you then have more confidence in terms of your data and processes by doing that yourselves, absolutely, that's the right route to go down. And the thing that I would say on this is there is no right or wrong answer. And we see lots of organizations that look outwards and say they're doing it really well. But what works for somewhere else won't necessarily work for you. And so when we're looking at operating model, we always recommend let's have that inward focus around what the stakeholders of this organization actually want and need right now. It could be that you're quite a mature organization in terms of governance and process, or it could be that actually the organization is quite immature in terms of governance and process, and you're working under a new way of working or a new operating model, which means that the HR team have had to be more agile in terms of how they support the organization. But we know educational establishments are the enablers to pupils, and HR have a responsibility alongside that to be the enablers to the organization. And so, as I said, the top tips here are no one size fits all. So don't spend too much time looking outside of the organization. Look within and see what the organization reads right now, and really focus around being that center of excellence, whether that means for you partnering and the transactional or just the partnering of the organization. That's absolutely your decision to make, but focus on what is right for your organization right now. And just a few other things to summarize. Generally, overall, harmony with software is important. Software can take away so many of the challenges. I often hear people say our managers don't engage correctly with software, and it's probably because the experience for them isn't great, or there's been some issue in the past that they've experienced. Relaunching a piece of software with feedback from employees and managers is something that can achieve a little bit more of that harmony if you give them that frictionless process. I've not really mentioned AI that much, but AI is here. It is helping lots of organizations, but not everybody has necessarily embraced how much it can help. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, and 70% of the HR professionals in the room said they'd never looked at ChatGPT, and others were asking it to help them write job interview questions, for example, and others were sharing that they'd had candidates who it was clear to see had typed into ChatGPT, write me a statement for this job I'm applying for, and they could almost measure it. So AI is here, and we need to look at how that can embrace and support us. There are lots of things it can do to help, but it's understanding how you approach that and approaching it with caution and how you can do that safely. Efficiencies, small and incremental, as I've said, they don't need to be big bang efficiencies. We can make the small differences that continually course correct and ultimately over time give us that improvement that we need. And the digital maturity journey, do think about where you are and where you want to be. If you're at the very start of that journey, planning to get to the end can seem like a mammoth step, but there are ways to break that down into smaller chunks and really focus around how you can improve your digital maturity. And we mentioned outsourcing in the last slide. There is, again, no right answer. It depends on your organization and the appetite and how you want to operate as an organization. And the final thing that I will end on in terms of the me talking part of this is something I often see on HR forums is, can anybody recommend a good HR system? And one of the things I just wanted to talk through is the analogy of buying the new suit, because what fits me won't fit you. That's really obvious when we're talking about clothing, but it is exactly the same for software. There is no silver bullet piece of software that fixes everything, and it will very much be dependent on your organization. Are you a little bit more top heavy? Are you wide in the middle? Or are you slim fit? Do you have lots of managers? Are you quite lean in terms of managers? Do you have a really, really slim HR and enablement services? That will depend on what type of technology will be able to assist you as an organization. And ultimately, what you buy now won't grow with you. A tailor will help you let it out so far. But if you are growing as an organization, there is a need to consider that you might need to look at reinvesting technology further down the line. But what fits you now might be good enough for now. And you might spend a lot on these systems and then never really use them. And again, we see this so often. New technology comes along, it gets implemented. We do the first phase, everybody goes back to the business as usual, and the project never really gains that momentum to continue into the second round of improvements. We've delivered the transactional, we're paying people, they're booking their holidays, but we've not released the value that we said that we were going to release. And conversely, you might spend a little and it will all fall apart within the first year. So the level of investment is yours to decide, but understanding that what you spend will ultimately be linked to how much you can deliver with that. And never forget, you can always add to this. So if right now all you need is that core system of record to manage, process, and deliver that experience to employees, that's fine. You can then add to that later down the line with an onboarding solution, a workforce management solution, a recruitment solution, a learning management solution, and that can be best of breed or integrated. So that's just an analogy I like to see, because I do often see that question, what is the best HR system for this type of organization? And I just want to make the point, there really isn't a one-size-fits-all answer there.